Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, a regulatory landscape, and capital markets. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining me for Cybersecurity Awareness Month, we have Rich Watson, Global and Asia-Pacific Cybersecurity Lead at EY, and Alym Rayani, Vice President of Microsoft Security at Microsoft, to discuss how organizations should prioritize investing in resources given the prevalence of AI. Gentlemen, it's great to have the both of you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks. And Alym, let's kick it off with you. Give us an overview of the cyber threat landscape and the trends that stand out to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. And first of all, I just want to say thank you for driving awareness and Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So I really appreciate that. You know, we've seen the threat landscape evolve quite a bit over the last several years and even the last year. And the way I'd sum it up is the physics problem in security is actually getting harder. The speed, sophistication, and the number of attacks are increasing. Just to give you a couple of things we've observed in terms of quantitative stats. You know, it takes, once an attacker compromises an organization through, let's say, a phishing email, it takes 72 minutes for them to get to sensitive information, not just information, but, you know, intellectual property. That means a defender has less than 2 hours to react to that. Or if I think about passwords, you know, password attacks are one of the #1 vectors. We were tracking, 2 years back, we were tracking 567 password attacks per second. Today, that average is well over 4,000. So just think about that. In the time I've been speaking, we've had over 100,000 password attacks just happen then. And then, of course, you know, as we look at the trends, it's no longer the hackers and the hoodies that everyone thinks about. You know, you've evolved beyond ransomware. Ransomware companies even offer support on the web. But now you've got nation states, and they're willing to go low and slow. They'll go into an organization's supply chain. They'll find that least common denominator. They'll stay low and slow for a while, and then they'll finally pounce when they get the information. And so there's just a lot of sophistication, and security officers, you know, their roles are expanding. So the physics problem really has gotten harder in security.
Yeah, and they're well funded too, which also
That's
helps,
right.
if you will. Richard, from your perspective, what about trends in the organizational response?
Yeah, I mean, organizations are really focused on regulation at the moment, given a lot of the new regs that have come out in Europe, particularly in the financial services and critical infrastructure sectors, as well as in the USA, of course, with the SEC disclosures earlier this year. But they're also thinking about generative AI too. EY survey has found that 62% of organizations are already implementing some form of generative AI in their cyber defense, finding really good use cases, particularly where there's a lot of data. So it could be things like updating policies and procedures to align with new regulation. It could be things like analyzing networks to recommend the next best action to treat a cyber attack, or it could be analyzing users' access to data and systems to make sure that that is appropriate. So we're really using AI now to fight AI. It's the only way to keep up with the attackers' use of this new technology.
Yeah. And so, Rich, when you think about organizational cyber risk and the financial repercussions around that, how do you triage this? How do you simplify and align to execute on your cyber risk strategy?
Yeah, a lot of organizations are now finding that they're no longer just getting more and more money to spend on cybersecurity. So we've got this paradox right now where the threat landscape is getting more and more difficult, and generative AI is obviously a part of that. But there's no more money to spend on cybersecurity. And so the response is to really try and simplify the technology. Organizations are moving to single platforms. They're using automation to essentially have to use fewer people in cyber defense over the longer term. In the short term, they're not really reducing their headcount in the cybersecurity function. They're redeploying people onto higher order tasks and using automation to do more of the sort of routine and repeatable tasks. So cyber attacks remain a real big focus for organizations, but there's no more money to fight, and therefore we've got to work smarter on defending.
Right. And let's take the conversation further, Rich, when you think about the double-edged sword that AI represents, because not only are the good actors leveraging that technology, the bad actors are as well, right? So when you think about cybercrime, you think about cybersecurity, whether it's mitigation or on the response end, what is that impact with the double-edged sword of AI?
Yeah, well, the way that attackers are using AI, I mean, one of the best use cases is in software development. And of course, developing malware is software development. And so we're seeing a lot more malware, the ability to produce malware 24/7. We're seeing a lot more authentic phishing attacks. In the old days, you used to be able to spot phishing attacks by looking for spelling mistakes or inappropriate language. All of that has gone now. And we're even seeing meetings like this one conducted with fake AI personas, inducing people to commit fraud and essentially depart company money.
Yeah, it really is fascinating how quickly not only the technology evolves, but how it's being leveraged in so many different ways. And to your point, it's not like, the phishing of yesterday, if you will. Alym, what's Microsoft's perspective on artificial intelligence?
Yeah, as maybe folks out there might know, Microsoft's made a big bet on generative AI and AI specifically across the board. And I would say it's sort of no different in security, to be honest. If I just take what Rich was talking about in terms of attackers, I'll give you some insights into some things that we've discovered over the course of 2023. So in 2023, we blocked about 70 billion attacks, and Microsoft did. And so I was curious how that panned out in terms of people and how we resource it, right? At the time, we had about 10,000 employees that were focused on security. So that's 7 million attacks blocked per employee. But when you get that down to even how they spend their time, that's 58 attacks blocked per minute per employee. So when you think about that, almost 1 a second, we didn't do that manually or even with automation. We had to take it to the next step. And we really had to leverage AI, both in research, but then real time in dealing with that. And so at the end of the day, Microsoft's perspective is that generative AI and AI isn't an optional thing for security. It's actually required and mandatory. And if you look at what attackers are doing, it's really, really necessary for any security program to scale over time.
Yeah, and Alym, I'm glad you brought that to light because you typically don't hear about the cybersecurity professionals within the organization unless something really bad goes wrong. So the fact that they're able to handle 7 million, attacks per employee within the organization, I think, shout out to them. It can't be an easy job, even with all of that help. So I think it's really important that we're recognizing the cyber professionals for Cybersecurity Awareness Month as well. So Richard, when we think about businesses best equipping themselves, because of course everyone's competing for resources, how should they be investing when you think about the prevalence of AI?
Yeah, I think the number one thing to do right now is to develop a cybersecurity strategy for the use of generative AI. Review everything that you are doing and look at how you can implement generative AI to do that more effectively, to do that more quickly. The biggest area to focus in is in reducing the time it takes to detect a cyber attack. Given these attacks now move at the speed of sound, you need to really focus on finding them quickly. But then, of course, you've got to think about the people too. The cybersecurity function can't do everything by itself. It can set a technical baseline, but really the best organizations are now focusing on making users across the organization responsible and accountable for their company's use of systems and data. And so spend a disproportionate amount of time on people and don't assume the technology can solve everything, because it can't.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Richard, and thank you for teeing this up when we think about minimizing cyber risk exposure, because you don't want to fall into that trap of focusing exclusively on AI and the products that are available outside of the enterprise and within the enterprise, because it's more holistic than that. So, Rich, when you think about practical next steps and good advice for businesses and the entire organization, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think continue with the cyber strategy that you were on. As you say, this isn't about forgetting everything that you've done already and just focusing on generative AI. It's more about using generative AI to boost your existing cyber strategy and taking the time to figure out where can it be inserted to create efficiencies, reduce cost, and ultimately make your cyber defenses more effective.
Right. And Alym, to wrap up here, when you think about the importance of developing a cyber risk exposure strategy, it's also about building a culture of security within the organization. Tell us why that's important and best practices for that.
That's right. And in fact, while we spend a lot of time with security leaders and we're always looking to partner, security is a team sport, by the way, even within the organization, but outside, but really building that culture of security. And I spend a lot of time get to spend time with CEOs, CFOs, and other leaders. And the number one thing I recommend is build that culture of security. While the security office is the lead, and to your point, shouting out to the defenders this month, I would encourage every member of the organization to keep security top of mind. And that's kind of what we've been doing at Microsoft for a little while, is kind of applying growth mindset and that problem to security and making it a cultural thing, making everybody accountable for security, because really attackers, they don't respect organizational boundaries. They go where they can. And so every person in the organization needs to be a defender in order for the organization to be productive.
All right, Richard, Alym, we appreciate the insight as well as your team's work for Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.